Okay. How are we holding up? Whew. Seems like every day we step into new and uncharted territory. Every day, unprecedented. Every day, a new adjustment. And yet, in such difficult time and with unrelenting bad news, we also see communities pulling together. We see people becoming mindful of those who are at much higher risk than us and what can we do for them. There's people out there who it's too risky for them to go shopping, right? They can't go to the supermarket that's jam-packed with people and unpacked with groceries. So if we have an opportunity to run an errand for somebody who can't do it themselves, that could be a lifesaver. And so all around the world, people are looking for opportunities to do good, even as we be extremely cautious, extremely careful. Here in Los Angeles, I think the Jewish community, as in so many other cities around the world, is on complete lockdown. The Jewish schools are all closed. The synagogues are almost all closed or soon will be all closed. People don't have an opportunity to learn together. And so our virtual Beis Midrash, our virtual classroom right here, this is it. This is what's going on right now in the world. And people have to be learning virtually. They can't be doing it in person. But while we cannot, let me just decline that. While we cannot afford to gather in prayer, and that's going to be very difficult for some people who have an obligation to say Kaddish. That's still being worked out. Chabad does have a program. If you're a person who needs to say Kaddish and you can't get to a minyan, or there is no minyan for you to join, Chabad has teams of volunteers who are getting together in minyans and saying Kaddish for people. So if you Google Chabad, coronavirus, Kaddish, you can sign up for that program. But while we cannot gather in person to learn together, we certainly can gather virtually to learn together. And it is our faith that Torah learning adds peace to the world, which doesn't just mean the absence of war. Adding Shalom, peace, first of all, Shalom, as we're going to discuss today in today's page, is one of the names of God. And it doesn't just mean peace like an absence of war. It also means Shalom, wholeness, right? Wholeness. So wholeness is like good health, right? So our virtual learning, first of all, it keeps us safe because we can learn together even though we're not going to physical classrooms, but also the merit of our learning adds to wholeness and healing in the world. As we have learned at the end of Tractate Brachos, all of your children add peace to the world. Do not read children, but builders, right? We in our Torah study together are building peace in the world. It's very important, the work that we're doing. And let's get right into it. We're holding by page 10 of Tractate Shabbos, Daf Yud. And we've been discussing, we're in chapter 1, and now we're discussing the second Mishnah of chapter 1, which isn't particularly related to Shabbos, but it's going to set up the next Mishnah, which is coming along, which is activities that we don't want to get involved in right before Shabbos begins. And to introduce that, we're saying activities that we don't really want to get involved in right before the time of the afternoon prayer. The afternoon prayer is rabbinically mandated. It's an obligatory prayer per the rabbis. The Torah doesn't tell us to pray 3 times a day, but it does tell us to bring a morning and an afternoon sacrifice. And so the rabbis instituted the morning and afternoon prayer. The Shema is biblically ordained morning and evening. So the question becomes, you shouldn't start these activities when it's close to the time of the prayer. But if you did start them, do you interrupt these activities in order to do the prayer? The answer is, if you know you're going to run out of time, then yes, you do interrupt. But if you believe that you're going to have enough time to do the afternoon prayer on time, so then you don't interrupt these activities that we are discussing. So one of those activities is a meal. If you're going to sit down to a meal and it's close to the time of the afternoon prayer, better you say the afternoon prayer first and then you have your meal. But if you started your meal, do you interrupt the meal in order to recite the prayer? And the answer is no, because it's rabbinically mandated. We don't further inconvenience people to stop their meal and go do the afternoon prayer, so long as they judge that they'll have time after the meal is over to recite the afternoon prayer on time. So then the question becomes, okay, so if you started your meal, you don't interrupt. So what constitutes starting your meal? So Rabbi Hanina answers, when one loosens his belt, right? So you can imagine, this is the old days. They didn't so much sit in chairs. It was more like benches, even divans, sometimes on the floor. They would wear a tight belt to hold their robes together, right? People didn't wear pants and shirts. They wore robes, right? Like loose-fitting robes. And then they tied it at the waist. Excuse me. So when they sat down to the meal, they would loosen their belt. Some people still do that, right? They loosen their belt a little to sit down to a meal. So from when a person loosens his belt is when the meal begins. Rav Sheshes strongly objects. He says, is it so hard to tie your belt? Okay, you loosened your belt, so tie it up again and pray, right? The meal should really be, in other words, he's saying, why don't we define the beginning of a meal when you started eating? Just because you loosened your belt, okay, so you could stand up and tighten your belt and do the afternoon prayer. Or if it's so difficult for you to tighten your belt, so stand up and say the afternoon prayer without your belt on, right? That's Rav Sheshes' answer to defining the beginning of a meal as from when a person loosens his belt. The Gemara answers from a quote, a verse from Amos, right? The prophet Amos at chapter 4, verse 12. Amos said, famous line, prepare to meet your God, O Israel. Prepare to meet your God, O Israel. Meaning that when you're going to meet with God, as in prayer, you need to prepare. So what does it mean to prepare? The Gemara is telling us, put on your belt, right? And earlier we had the little teaching, when it says put on your belt, it's saying, fix yourself up, right? The belt becomes to symbolize just getting ready by looking proper, right? So it's not just a simple thing of tying on the belt. You're going to, arrange your clothing, get ready, right? And when you loosen your belt, you indicate you're just in a different mode. You're in casual. You're ready to eat. You've loosened your belt. But if you're going to pray, you want to be dressed properly. When I was a kid, I used to go to a big synagogue in the suburbs, and I had an objection, just as a kid, it's kind of my own little instinct that, the people that dress up to go to synagogue, they're dressing up for each other to show off. Shouldn't we just be comfortable when we go pray? And then when I moved to Los Angeles, and for many years, places that I was praying at, it was much more casual. Where I grew up, people would always wear a suit to go to synagogue. And here, not so much. And if you go to Israel, you'll see that all as well. People will dress neatly, but they might not necessarily put on the whole suit. Not necessarily. But now I start to understand that per our sages quoting Amos, prepare to meet your God, Israel, there's a certain dignity that you need to acquire in your clothing, right? Almost like from Shakespeare, Polonius says to Hamlet, the clothes oft announce the man, right? And it's like, you do need to take care of your clothing. You do need to dress in a dignified manner, really at all times. I mean, if you're a religious person who's visibly religious, you wear a kippah, you should dress a little better. You should wear neat clothes, ideally, slacks and a button shirt and some kind of a blazer. But at least if you're going to pray, you want to be presentable. In the same way that if you were going to meet a king, you wouldn't go in your sweats, right? So if so, for an earthly king who is here today and gone tomorrow, how much more when we meet the King of Kings, should we make sure that we are presentable. But while it may be true that the belt sort of symbolically stands in for getting ourselves neat and ready and presentable, it is in fact a belt that is mentioned. And from this daf, from this teaching, people learn out that a belt is necessary. Particularly in the old days when what they normally wore was like a poncho, right? Like a large poncho, a large garment that you would tie at the waist to keep it on. If there was no belt on such a garment, so then it would hang loosely from your shoulders down to your knees, let's say, and there would be nothing in between your heart and your nakedness, right? And so our sages say that you need to have a belt in order to, tie off, as it were, to separate one's heart from one's nakedness. And indeed today, the law for people who are Kabbalistically minded, and this would be the Hasidic community, right? People who are in the Hasidic streams, and a little bit more mystically minded in prayer, so they will put on a gartel. So if for example, if you know people who are Chabad, right, and who daven, who pray in a Chabad shul, it's very common that a man in prayer who is of the Chabad, tradition, will put on a gartel. So that's a black belt like this. We can almost, jokingly say that this is a black belt. You're going to have a black belt in prayer. And if you were getting ready to pray, right, so then you would take a gartel like this, and you would put it up here at about elbow height, because that's similar to the belt that the Kohen Gadol would wear in the temple, right, that the priest would wear in the temple. And then you would arrange it like this. And then you would be ready to pray, because now you've got a separation between your heart and your lower body, your nakedness, as it were. So that's the black belt in prayer. However, in the Ashkenazic tradition, a little bit more, shall we say, Litvish, a little bit more Talmudically oriented, just a different orientation. They don't wear the gartel, and then the way they define this is a person who is accustomed to wear a belt all day, every day, needs to have his belt on when he prays. But a person who's not accustomed to wear a belt does not have to wear a belt. That's the Ashkenaz tradition, right? And the more Hasidic tradition is to put on the gartel when one is praying. That's getting ready to pray. Somebody, Christo Cheney says, I've seen white gartels as well, but not very often. Basically for Yom Kippur and for Passover. The white gartel goes with the white kittel, right? Because you're supposed to be dressed in white. We do this for sure at Yom Kippur. Some people do it at Rosh Hashanah also. And often the prayer leader, the leader of the Seder, will do that at Passover. And that's reminiscent of one's shrouds that one will be buried in at death. You wear just a white garment. So on Yom Kippur and on Passover, you're sort of remembering that this is all about, my spiritual self. And at the end of my life, I'll look back on my spiritual deeds, not my material possessions. That's a lesson for another day. Okay. Rav Ashi observed that Roth Kahana had an interesting approach to getting dressed up or not dressed up when he would pray. So Roth Kahana, when there was suffering in the world, so he would not put on a fancy cloak, right? And meaning like basically a very fancy prayer shawl. He would wear a prayer shawl, obviously, to pray. I'm not sure if he's talking about his prayer shawl or just, I'm sorry, it's not his prayer shawl, it's his cloak, right? So Roth Kahana, in a time of suffering, would not dress fancy. Rather, he would just approach in his clothes. He would obviously put on his prayer shawl and his tefillin, and he would clasp his hands, and thereby, without dressing up, and by clasping his hands in prayer, he would take on an attitude of complete submission, like a slave before his master, and supplicate to God, we need your help. That's like now, right? Right now, we don't have to worry so much about dressing up. What we need to do is worry about supplicating with all our heart and all our soul that healing should come into the world, that we should find the cure and the vaccine and all the things that we need, and that all of this, social distancing and isolation should slow the spread of the disease tremendously so that the hospitals don't get overwhelmed. That's what flattening the curve is, so that the spread gets slowed down, and at any given time, the hospitals can handle the number of people who need respirators, right? That's the kind of things we're praying for now, supplicating with clasped hands. But during a time of peace, when things were okay, so then Rav Ashi would be more particular, more meticulous about dressing up when he would go to pray, right? Then he would make sure to wear his fancy cloak, his finest clothes, when coming before God, right? So in a time of peace, it was more like, more coming to God like, okay, I'm getting ready for you and let's be together and I'm going to dress up accordingly. But in a time of suffering, to just get to prayer, pray long and hard, and supplicate because we need God's mercy now. Back to our Mishnah. We were discussing if one sat down to a meal, should he interrupt for the afternoon prayer? And we discussed, so when does that begin? Another activity that we try not to begin close to the afternoon prayer, but if we did begin it, we don't interrupt, is judging, right? So if if a sage, some kind of a rabbi, is going to judge a case that's brought before him, that's obviously going to be a long and involved thing, and we wouldn't want that to start close to the time of the afternoon prayer because he might come to skip the afternoon prayer. So the question is, when does a judge who's judging a case start judging a case? When do we define that that has started? So our sages say that if it was the first trial of the day, it's when they put on their judicial robe, or right, in the ancient times, it was a prayer shawl. Sorry, I was confused before about cloaks and shawls. But Chazal, our sages of blessed memory, when they would sit to judge a case in ancient times, they would put on a prayer shawl in order to sit in judgment. Today, when rabbis get together for a beis din, right, to render judgments on cases that are brought before a Jewish judicial court as opposed to a secular judicial court, and there are many cases that litigants will bring to a beis din, rather than going to, a court of the land. So now the rabbis who sit on the beis din, who are trained for this, they don't wear a prayer shawl when they sit in judgment. From when does the case begin? When they sit down, right? When they sit down to begin the judgment. But if they've been judging cases all day, whether in ancient times or today, so they've already judged a case and now it's a new case, so the new case begins when the litigants begin explaining their case, right? When the first litigant begins explaining his case, that's the beginning of the new case, and we wouldn't want to start that close to the time of the afternoon prayer, but if they did start, we wouldn't interrupt it so long as they had time to get to the afternoon prayer after this case would, reach a natural stopping point. Okay, Rav Chisda and Rabba bar Rav Huna. So Rav Chisda and Rabba bar Rav Huna were sages who judged cases. And they were sitting together and judging cases, and they were judging cases all day long. And what they didn't do was eat. They were starving themselves because they were going from case to case. So Rav Chia bar Rav from Difti said to them, what are you doing? This is unnecessary. You should not be starving yourselves because you're judging cases all day long. Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher Moses, He judged cases all day long, right? And his father-in-law, Jethro, came to him and said, you can't do that. It is not right. You will kill yourself judging cases all day long. And so Moses stopped doing that, adopted a better system where he was able to judge the most difficult cases, right? They appointed other judges to judge less difficult cases, but still the most difficult cases would come to Moses. He would judge those, and he would teach Torah, right? Because he was transmitting the Torah to the children of Israel. And he managed to judge cases, teach Torah, and eat. And likewise, said Rav Chia bar Rav from Difti to Rav Chisda and Rabba bar Rav Huna, you also can judge cases and eat, right? That's what you need to do. And since we're on the subject of eating, when should a person eat his first meal? So it's one of these, digressions are going to happen all the time in the Talmud. Right now we're on the subject of eating. And so the question comes up, when should a person eat his first meal of the day? And this is pretty interesting because it has come into fashion lately to diet through intermittent fasting, right? So there's a kind of eating, a diet plan, which is good for people, some say, where, you stop eating at a certain point at night, for example, 8 p.m., and you don't eat again until late morning, perhaps 11 in the morning or even noon. And, this contradicts that age-old idea that we all heard when we were kids, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. You should definitely have a big breakfast early in the day. Well, that message was brought to us by the American breakfast cereal lobby. So it's certainly good for the makers of breakfast foods that we should have a big meal early in the day. But is it good for us? Well, according to our sages, let me read this to you. The sages taught in a Baraisa, eating in the first hour of the morning is the time of eating for Ludim. Who are the Ludim? Some say they are members of a nation of cannibals. Others say that this refers to the people who were, bought by Romans to be gladiators, and they need their strength because they're going to fight to the death. But more importantly, because they're going to fight to the death, they're trying to eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you shall die, right? So the people who are unfortunately enslaved and forced to become gladiators, who are going to fight to the death for the pleasure of the, rich people in Rome, okay, so they should eat their first meal of the day, not us, right? That's who would eat in the first hour of the day. The second hour of the day is the time of eating for robbers. Robbers, since they spend the whole night stealing, they eat early in the morning. The third hour of the day is the time of eating for heirs, Heirs, meaning rich people, right? People who inherit great wealth and don't have to work, i.e. people who inherit a lot of money and do not work for their sustenance. Their only preoccupation in the early hours of the morning is eating. The fourth hour is the time of eating for workers, because they work hard and they need food a little bit earlier. And the fifth hour is the time of eating for all people. Isn't that something? Our sages recommend that the right time for an average person to start eating is in the fifth hour of the day, meaning the start of the fifth hour after sunrise, right? So this is like, in other words, sunrise plus 4 hours is approximately when you should begin eating in the day. That's the time to have your breakfast. So if the sun rose at 6 o'clock in the morning, you don't want to have a meal until about 10 o'clock in the morning. That's when our sages recommend that we start our eating. And that's right in line with, this people who believe now that a good diet means that you don't eat late at night and you don't eat, until, say, mid-morning or late morning. And I will just say personally that when I do that, I feel better, all right? I feel better. You don't really need to eat so early in the morning. Alejandro Martinez says, what about kids before school? Excellent question. This is not going to be universally applicable. I would say that kids before school, sure, they should eat in the morning because kids do burn calories faster than adults. And not every kid is going to have the opportunity to have that mid-morning snack, right? And for that to be their first meal of the day. So I'm certainly not telling you that children shouldn't be fed before school. They should. Although I'll also say that my kids, they don't even want to eat before school. They don't seem to need it. So if a kid doesn't want to eat before school, maybe let them not eat and then see how it goes. Maybe it's not a bad idea for kids, but that's something, I'm not a doctor and I'm not telling you how to deal with your kids. But I am telling you that for me, I have learned that waiting till much later in the day for that first meal, than the old adage, old in America, have a big breakfast, eggs and sausages and stuff like that, or a big bowl of sugary cereal, at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's not good. It is not helpful. Much better to wait till later. Okay. That's the first meal of the day. Very good. We continue. In a bathhouse. So I'm not even sure what our transition is, why we get to the bathhouse. Because in our Mishnah we said that one shouldn't enter the bathhouse close to the afternoon prayer, the mincha prayer, because going to the bathhouse is going to be a long and involved thing. So you shouldn't start that before the afternoon prayer. But if you did start that, then we don't interrupt because it can be a long, involved, complicated thing. So apropos of that, we get a few more teachings about the bathhouse, namely that in ancient times, what was a bathhouse? And you can kind of think of it like a spa today. When you enter the spa, there's a lobby. Okay, so in the lobby, no problem. You can greet people by saying Shalom, and you can even discuss matters of Torah because the lobby is like anywhere else. So that's the area where everyone has their clothes on. Once you go into the locker room, where some people have taken off their clothes because they're about to go into the hot part of the spa, and other people are dressed because they got dressed or they haven't undressed yet. So it's mixed. Some people are clothed and some people are not clothed. So in that area of the bathhouse, we can greet each other by saying Shalom, but we do not discuss matters of Torah because some people are around who are naked. And here it's worth explaining that why are we discussing particularly greeting people by saying Shalom? Because Shalom, which means peace and wholeness, is also one of the names of God. So we don't want to say one of the names of God when naked people are standing around. And so we don't want to discuss matters of Torah, but we can greet each other, though you wouldn't want to greet a naked person, but you can greet somebody with his clothes on, even though nearby there's a naked person. Once you get into the area of the bathhouse where everyone is naked, so there you don't discuss Torah, matters of Torah, and you do not greet each other by saying Shalom, right? So that's the 3 stages of the bathhouse where everyone is dressed, we can discuss Torah, and we can greet each other with Shalom. Where some people are dressed and some are not, we do not discuss matters of Torah, but we can greet people who are dressed by saying Shalom. And where everyone is naked, we don't even greet people by saying Shalom. Good. And there was something else I wanted to say about that, but it has escaped me. Oh, yeah. So just apropos of this, it's not here in our Gemara, but it's worth noting that if you are a person who, when you go to the bathroom, you like to read, right? So when you're in the bathroom, read magazines or books that are about secular subjects, the news or fiction or whatever, poetry. What we do not do is take Torah into the bathroom with us. You don't take a book of scripture. You don't take a book about scripture. You don't read Torah or anything related to Torah when you're sitting in the bathroom. Worth saying there. Okay. And this brings us to 3 teachings of Rava bar Mechasya, in the name of Rav Chama bar Guria, in the name of Rav. We're going to get a series of teachings from Rava bar Mechasya, in the name of Rav Chana bar Guria, in the name of Rav. So this series of teachings all come from Rav, this chain of transmission, Rav to Rav Chama bar Guria to Rava bar Mechasya. Number one, if you give a person a gift, tell him that you've given him a gift in case he might not find out. This actually just happened. We sent some Purim baskets to some friends, and luckily I asked one of my friends, did you receive that? And the answer was no. It turned out that he had moved and we had sent it to the wrong address. I got to get him a replacement gift. But if I hadn't checked with him, right, it would have got lost and he would have known that I tried to send him a gift and I wouldn't have known that he didn't receive it, right? So you need to tell people when you're giving them a gift. And we learn this out from Moses, right? God said to Moses, I am giving you a precious gift. Let me put this in front of me. And that gift is Shabbos, right? So we're here in Tractate Shabbos. Perhaps that's why this teaching is coming up right now. And so when the Holy One, blessed be He, gave Shabbat to Israel, He told Moses to inform the people about it. And that was also taught in a Baraisa. The verse states, quote, for I am God who sanctifies you, meaning that the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Moses, I have a good gift in my treasure house, and Shabbat is its name, and I seek to give it to Israel. Go inform them about it. And from here, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, one who gives a gift of bread to a child needs to inform his mother, right? So if you give a gift to a child, like a piece of bread, a muffin, a donut, you got to tell the mom that you gave the child a gift. In fact, you should ask the mom before you give the gift. But this is where it was acceptable. It was a time when that practice was okay. The teachers could certainly give candy or, let's say, a reward to a student who did well at the school. But you should tell the mom that you did that. There's actually going to be an objection from Rav Hama bar Hanina, who says, well, wait a minute, didn't we also learn from Moses that when God appeared to him, and this was in last week's Torah portion, right, God appeared to Moses and sort of showed Moses his glory, and after that experience, right, of Moses being sort of hidden in a cleft and God covered him with his hand so that he would not die, when God showed all that it was possible to show a mortal of God's essence, and from there we get the 13 attributes of God. And when Moses returned to the encampment from that experience, his face was radiant with light, right? Moses' face was literally glowing. We just talked about that yesterday. So Moses didn't know when he came back that his face was glowing until the people told him. So Rav Chama bar Hanina is saying, well, God gave him the gift of a radiant face, and Moses didn't know that he had been given the gift of a radiant face. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel answers, well, Moses' radiant face is a fact that was certain to become revealed to Moses. God didn't have to tell him, I'm going to give you a radiant face, because Moses would learn that soon enough when he returned to the people. But the reward for keeping Shabbos is not readily revealed to all of us, right? The fact that God has given us this gift, Shabbos, which is a treasure from God's treasure house, right? We don't really know that. We don't realize that. It's not obvious to all of us that keeping Shabbos is a treasure. And so that is the case where God said to Moses, tell the people that keeping Shabbos is a treasure for you. And if you keep it, you'll have all kinds of reward, both in this world and the next. Another teaching of Rav, transmitted to us by Rav Chama bar Guria, which transmitted to us by Rav bar Mechasya, is don't favor one of your children over another, right? If you have multiple kids, don't give a gift to one that you don't give to the rest. because as we know, when Jacob favored his son Joseph, right, who was the only sort of teenage son of his beloved Rachel, who died when she was giving birth to the only other one that she gave birth to, which was Benjamin, but Benjamin was still a baby. The fact that Jacob gave Joseph a special gift, right, that multicolored coat, it was on account of that coat that the jealousy of his brothers, rose to such a pitch that eventually they sold Joseph into slavery, and eventually the whole nation of Israel went into Egypt and was enslaved for hundreds of years. So from that we learn, don't favor one of your kids over the others. You might have to treat each of them differently because all kids, have their own needs. You don't treat every kid the same way. You have to, address kids according to what they need from you, but don't show favoritism. And number 3, the third teaching we learned today from Rabba Bar Mechasya in the name of Rav Chama Bar Guria in the name of Rav, is that when choosing a city to live in, it is better to live in a city that was created more recently than a city that was created longer ago. Why? Because it is the nature of people to sin. And in a city that's very old, there's a lot of sins accumulated. And who knows but whether that city has reached that level of sin which is going to lead to some kind of holy retribution on that city. And we learned that from Sodom and Gomorrah, right? That Lot lived in Sodom, but he didn't live in Gomorrah. And then when he left, he went to Zoar, a city that had less sin piled up, right? So it's an interesting teaching. The fact is, anywhere that you live, people live there, people do wrong. If you live in a place that's really old, so there's going to be a lot of sin accumulated in that city. Tomorrow, we will continue with some more teachings, some more wisdom teachings of Rabba Bar Mechasya in the name of Rav Chama Bar Guria in the name of Rav. For today, some takeaways. It is good to dress up when one is approaching God in prayer. But during a time of suffering, per the teaching of Roth Kahana, right? It was Roth Kahana. Just checking, double checking. Yeah, that Rav Ashi observed that Roth Kahana, during a time of suffering, more important than what you wear, is that you adopt an attitude of supplication, like a slave before a master. We don't dress up, but we clasp our hands, we bow our heads, and we really beg for healing and for mercy during a time of suffering. And that we engage in learning, right? That we engage in this virtual learning. It saves lives, not only because it gives people a place where they can learn, not going to a physical building. Right now, we need all of us to avoid physical gathering unless it's necessary, because we live in a time when learning is possible remotely, so we should engage in virtual learning, but also because we need to keep the learning going, because learning is good for the world. Torah learning, active Torah learning, is good for the world. It builds peace in the world, meaning it adds wholeness to the world, meaning it adds healing to the world. So shkoyach, my friends, that you are here learning today. May you go from strength to strength. May you always be strengthened in your efforts to learn and to add wholeness and peace to the world. I'm just going to check to see if there's any questions. Very good, very good. Okay. Was there anything over here? I don't see it. All right. That is all I see. I will ask you guys for a favor that you're watching on Facebook. Fantastic. But do me a favor. For the sake of people who aren't on Facebook, I am simultaneously going live every day on YouTube. And it would be great if more people became aware of our YouTube channel. So it's nice if you would just subscribe also on YouTube. That way you'll also be notified. when we go live. And it's a way to just tell people if we grow our presence on YouTube, then more people will become aware of it and be able to join our class. So it's good. Please subscribe on YouTube. And if you have friends who are not on Facebook, so send them the link to the Accidental Talmudist YouTube page. And there they'll see that every class that we do, our daily learning, is on YouTube as well. And that's going to make it available to more people, so more people can join in the merit of this learning, and we can all simultaneously help heal the world. Ellen Goldstein Coven says, I was curious about the high priest's hairdo. Oh, we mentioned that yesterday, right? That there was such a complicated haircut, that's a haircut you wouldn't want to start getting before the afternoon prayer. I don't know what the haircut looks like, but it was something like that the end of one hair wrestled next to the beginning of another. And I had the sense that the reason it was so complicated is because somehow that hairdo was like every single hair on their head was a slightly different length, but in a layered look. So I'd like to know more about what that actually looked like. All I know is that it was a complex hairdo for the Kohen Gadol. Thank you, my friends, for joining today. Sending you big love, and please join me in a prayer. Please God, rain down healing on our world from heaven like dew, like rain. We're in the rainy season. Let it rain healing from heaven. Everybody who's got this coronavirus, may they be healed speedily. Everyone who's been exposed to it, may they not get sick. Everyone who is healthy, may they stay healthy. And the people who are ill and really ill, may they get the healing that they need, and may they get it quickly. May there be resources for them. And may we all join together in bringing healing to the world. And specifically, if you know people who are at risk, who can't leave their houses, and who need food or other supplies, help them get it. Running an errand for people who are at risk could be a lifesaver. Sending you big love, my holy brothers and sisters, all the best.